we're biting some folks in the back of their pants. And they don't like it. Current forest practices contribute sediment into streams. Notice there isn't a may in there. The rate of harvest is off the scale. Now, look at the size of that clear cut on the left-hand side. That's 290 hectares. Every watershed is a community watershed because it doesn't matter if it's people, if it's wildlife, if it's fish, it's a community of something. So we have to think that way.
So I want to introduce next Dave Weaver. Dave is a professional forester who spent a lot of his career in the bush. He was a registered professional forester between 1981 and 2016, including 11 years as a field forester with Macmillan Bloedel here on the island. But he left on realizing that corporate forestry was not for him, and he moved with his family to Smithers. While in the northern interior, he worked for 14 years as a forest consultant, doing pre- and post-logging assessments, and as a forestry college instructor, teaching applied ecology. He's also held a joint woodlot license, implementing low-impact forestry techniques. For the last 12 years of his career, he worked for the Ministry of Forests out of Victoria, which gave him a deep understanding of the regulations around logging and a keen awareness of how these regulations are administered. During these years, he traveled all over BC, developing innovative silviculture policies, and he provided field training in alternative approaches to clear cutting. He's currently volunteering with the Beaufort Watershed Stewards in Fanny Bay. In his spare time, he likes hiking, camping, kayaking, skiing, and volunteering at events like this. Dave.
Can you see the screen okay? Yes? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you much, Guy. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here tonight. And I can see my presentation over on this side. That's right, I'm Dave Weaver, retired professional forester. I'm no longer a registered professional forester. I'm a recovering professional forester. I noticed there was a few in the audience here. Hopefully you recover as well. And today I'm going to be speaking about, I have the opportunity to provide the information part of this talk and provide data, information on the study that I did. And it's primarily this case study that I did on the Tsable River. You don't pronounce the T on the Tsable, in 2023, and I published it in 2024. And basically trying to answer the question, how much logging is too much? And you can see this photograph taken from Denman Island, looking across at the Beaufort Range. And it's a beautiful photograph. It's a beautiful day. It's early in the spring, I believe. Most of the photographs in this presentation today were taken by the volunteers at Beaufort Watershed Stewards. And it's beautiful when there's snow on the mountains. You can see a couple of clear cuts on the very top end where there's a bit of snow on it, and it doesn't look all that bad. But folks, from that kind of angle, a lot of folks are saying, well, Dave, how much logging is too much? So let's just start with the land that we deal with here in the Beaufort Range. We basically, our volunteer group operates between Royston, just south of Courtenay, all the way to past Deep Bay to about Qualicum Bay. And the land is really, we respectfully acknowledge that the watersheds that we depend on in this area are in the unceded traditional territory of the Comox, Pentlatch, and the Qualicum First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. But there's a bit of a caveat there. And that image to the left is Dunsmuir. It's a drawing of the land that was given to Dunsmuir through, I believe that drawing was made from the Commons magazine, which is a local one in the Comox Valley. It was given to him in 1887, and Daniel will speak a little bit more in his talk about that. So basically, it is mostly private managed forest land. It's not public. It was taken away from the First Nations that I just mentioned, and it has been, ever since then, managed primarily for forest products. So to give you the context, there's the Tsable River. What I'll be talking about is right in the middle of the area that the Beaufort Watershed Stewards operate. It's right across from Denman Island and Hornby. You can kind of get an idea of the size of it. Your journey today is my story, so I'm going to share you my story. I'm just going to give you a couple of bullets as to what's going to go on. I'm going to talk about who we are, who the Beaufort Watershed stewards are, and we've got a big smile on there, and we've got teeth, and I'll explain what the teeth are about. It's a little bit more than happy, believe me. Why we did this, there is a satellite image of busy logging on the landscape. It's actually a watershed just north of the Tsable, and you'll see that little icon on the lower left-hand side, and that's to remind you that that's what I'm talking about, is this level of harvesting that's going on. What I used, yes, that's the golden goblet. I found the golden goblet, and it was a moving for me, and hopefully you get moved here today as well. Yes, alert, this is the information session. There is a few graphs, hopefully. How's the caffeine level? Let's see the hands up. Is it? Thank you. Who loves graphs in the room? Okay, they're over on this side. Okay, I'll have to work on this side. Don't worry, there's only like 3 or 4. So, and obviously what's next? And that's really, it's obvious that the size or the volume that's coming off the land has to change. I give the answer away. Also, I want to speak to, thanks Geraldine for such a wonderful talk at the beginning. And my influence over the past is when First Nations, Indigenous people come to the table and talk about land use planning and whatever it is, protect caribou, moose, they bring some remembrance of and the importance of these animals and to the table. And I bring water to the table today because water is really important. And I put it next to this incredibly manufactured ecosystem here that, yeah, we'll put it underneath the Douglas fir. But we bring water to the table. Water cannot speak, but we're talking about water mostly today because we're talking about a watershed. And thanks for that. Who are the Beaufort Watershed Stewards? A fantastic group of about 50 volunteers who have tremendous energy and have supported me in this whole campaign. And our whole job is to kind of try and put the jigsaw puzzle together of watersheds and try to figure out what's going on. The baseline of our work is data collection, baseline data collection. We're a proactive group. We don't have boil water orders. We don't have massive issues as far as protect this, protect that. There's some, don't worry about that. But primarily stream quality, stream quantity, and groundwater sampling. You can recognize Mike in the middle there. And we're branching out into other projects. We started an aquifer mapping program because we're so lucky we have a retired geophysicist on our group, which will bend your mind with his graphs. You're lucky he's not here tonight, but this afternoon. And we're doing outreach, which is what we do right now. Share the information we have. Give that information to the public, because that's really the crux of democracy is information, as Socrates says. And I'm presenting today forest health assessments. This is the second forest health assessment I've done, hydrologically and ecosystem health assessments. And we're developing some teeth with these assessments. That's why I got the teeth on here. We're biting some folks in the back of their pants. And they don't like it. And we like it. And hopefully you like it too, okay? So remember that. It may not taste that good. It may taste better over here, but that's better. So 3 main reasons why we did this. Why did we start this? Folks kept on coming to me, Dave, intuitively, emotionally, that's too much. To me, it looks like too much. Is that too much, Dave? And I say, yeah, intuitively, it looks too much to me too. But you know, we should be able to quantify that through a cumulative effects assessment. Let's put some science behind it. Let's have some backing of the scientists in British Columbia, rather than me going out and saying, yeah, it looks kind of bad. So that was one of the first reasons. The second one was this report, Forest Practices Board. Anybody know the Forest Practices Board in the room? I know there's a few that do, yes. So it's the arm's length watchdogs of the forest industry in British Columbia. They are actually funded by the Ministry of Forests. That's convenient, isn't it? There's a budget line there. They report to the Minister of Forest, just to give you that heads up. But they published this report in 2022, Forest Practices in Water, Opportunities for Action. An absolutely stunning report for me. The chair that produced this resigned about a month later. I think this was his swan song. And these are quotes right out of there. They found these incredible points. First one, there is no legal requirements to assess or consider cumulative effects of forest practices in most watersheds in British Columbia. Second one was current forest practices contribute sediment into streams. Notice there isn't a may in there. Contribute. And the third one is historical forest practices. The legacy that we're left with continue to negatively affect water. The third one is from our data that we're collecting as Beaufort Watershed stewards. The Tsable River was showing poor quality. Now you can see here's the first graph. This side's falling asleep already, I can see that. Get over there, get the cookies. You can see the Tsable River on the right-hand side. And then we have the other watersheds, Mud Bay, Waterloo, Wilfrid, Cowie. Those are the other streams I assessed in 2021. Now the numbers, that's the turbidity unit. I don't know what the N means. What does the N mean, Mike? I can't remember. Yeah, that's a mouthful. Thank you. So it's basically the amount of turbidity that's in the water. So boil water order is 1 turbidity unit. Though these are measurements that we took when the rainfall was heavy, so over 10 millimeters a day. So the threshold for fish habitat, especially when they're spawning, is 5 NTUs. You can see the Cowie's at 6.88, and the Tsable knocked it out of the park at 15.6. And that's a picture of the Tsable River. I believe that's one of our members' photograph of the Tsable while it's running hard in November. And well, you can call it agua cafe or something like that. It's looking a little muddy. The whole Bain Sound goes a little muddy then. So those were the reasons we did this. And what do we use? Oh my goodness, I found out about this protocol in 2020. The Cumulative Effects of Assessment Protocol for Aquatic Ecosystems. Here it is. This is the baby. And it was my holy grail. Because my first assessment I had to cobble together. There was no thresholds for British Columbia prior to this assessment. And this had such wonderful thresholds for metrics that I could assess in a watershed that determine its health, hydrological health, and its aquatic ecosystem health. So it had this, it's a comprehensive protocol. It's not a heavy read. That's not too bad. It's actually less paper than my report. My report's a little bit longer. But if you have trouble sleeping tonight, read this one. It's very good. It has 6 core indicators. So there's only 6 that you have to worry about to assess the health. It's science-based. The references for all the scientists that contribute to this are probably about 3 or 4 pages long. So it's made in BC. And it actually really targets the negative impacts of logging and rates them. It's a coarse protocol, meaning it's dependent on GIS information, geographic information layers that you would get publicly, and it's based on that. But it says that I did augment this sort of coarse scale with local knowledge. Basically, readjusted the road locations, the stream locations, and did some field testing and increased the accuracy of the assessment. And it's user-friendly mostly. There's one indicator that's pretty clunky, and I had to kind of do a bit of back and forth with the government to kind of figure it out, and I think it's there. So here we are. There's the Tsable River. This is an oblique satellite image looking, if you were hovering in a helicopter or a balloon over top of Denman Island. You can see Buckley Bay. It's a big watershed, about 10,000 hectares. Goes right from the beach all the way up to about 1,200 meters, I believe, something like that. It's all privately owned by corporation, and so it operates under the Private Managed Forest Land Act, basically from Highway 19 all the way up to the Alpine. There's a photograph of where we do our samples, a little different than that Agua Cafe shot I showed you there. That's in the summer when the flow was much lower, and it's a beautiful stream, or river, I should say. And the reference point, my wife Rose suggested, we gotta have some sort of reference, like people can relate to. And what's about the same size of that watershed that people relate to? And I don't know if she should suggest it. I guess I should say she suggested that, but it looked like Denman and Hornby. It's roughly about the same, the net area of that watershed is about the same as Denman and Hornby. So I can kind of relate to it that way. Remember that, I've got a couple of slides on that, especially this side of the room. So we got right to the results. That's pretty quick. So this is what I found out. Those have the 6 indicators that they call it across the top, and there'll be metrics within those indicators. There's things that we actually measure on the ground or measure on GIS for each indicator. So you can see that this is very directly related to logging. So there's road density, basically kilometers per square kilometer, road density within 100 meters of a stream, road density on unstable slopes, so that's all slopes above 60%, number of crossings, wherever a road crosses one of those streams that we've mapped out, tally those. Riparian disturbance means the protected areas, how much is disturbed, or they log straight through. We had to interpret that from satellite images, and I had to field check them. And then peak flow. This is the complicated one. And this is what Dr. Elias, who's going to speak on this tour in Vancouver, advocates, that equivalent clear-cut area is not everything in the health in the watershed. It's just a part of it. So peak flow is a function of the size of the watershed, its elevation grade, where the wetlands are, the sort of configuration, a real geomorphological one. There's about 9 metrics in there. But one of them, which is most important, is how much is in a clear-cut equivalent state. Now, I'm not going to explain that tonight, especially for this side of the room. This side might get it, I'm not too sure, but that's another talk. I've oriented, of the 6 indicators, those 4 that are elevated along the H line are in the high category. The ones that came out on the bottom are in the low category. And for the left side of the room, here are the indicator values. And this side of the room, don't look at those, that's not gonna work. But just to give you a context, look at the roads. And being probably the easiest indicator and the easiest metric to measure, you can see that it knocks it out of the park. The threshold for a high is 2.3 kilometers per square kilometer. It doesn't mean too much, but for the Tsable, it was 3.7. So there's a ton of roads. When you get a ton of roads, you get a ton of logging. When you get a ton of logging, you get a lot of impact on hydrological and aquatic habitat. You can see for peak flow, it's a ratio. It's not really because it has so many metrics. The threshold for high is about 0.42, and this was 0.6. So again, it's in the high category. So I'm just going to highlight those 2 indicators and give you an example. This is where I'm looking under the hood a little bit and to show you some of the detail, only on 2 points. The first one is road density. And you see those images of Denman Island. That's the outline of Denman Island and Hornby, which is equivalent area, as I showed earlier, to the Tsable River. And there's 306 kilometers of road that we could detect from GIS later. That's the equivalent of driving 16 times from the north end of Denman Island to the south. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, hang in there, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. That's a lot of road. The second metric was equivalent clear-cut area, or a metric out of the peak flow. It's 4,832 hectares of equivalent clear-cut area. So basically, 58% of that watershed has its hydrological interception disturbed. So that's the equivalent of all of Denman Island being in a clear-cut state, except for the lower part where Boyle Point Park is. So that gives you a bit of a context what's going on in the Tsable. Here's the final result. Tsable River, there's a final assessment for the watershed. It's a function of these 3 components. Again, I'm following this protocol, this scientific protocol, to the letter. Each component, water quality, water quantity, ecosystem function, has a rating, and it's a bit of a mix of all those indicators. Won't go into that. That's a real sleeper. But with high risk in the roads, it basically bumps all of those components into a high risk. And then for the overall watershed, you end up with a high risk, as I'm going to quote here, a high potential of negatively impacting natural state of hydrological processes. So it's a risk rating. It's not a for sure. It's not like Tsable is really messed. It just has a high risk based on all of these assessments. And the recommendation, when you have a high risk like this in the watershed, again, right out of this protocol, just you need to adjust development activities. The only major development activity in the Tsable River is logging. There's some abandoned old coal mines, but that's it. And maybe some quads that run through the creek. That's about as bad as it gets. And that'll be the grandkids. You know. But don't believe me. There's 2 other studies I was able to dig up that showed that the Tsable is also in somewhat of a high risk. And 2 of those publications, the province did their own course assessment. They never published this. This is data that I was able to get from my contact in Victoria for some of my relationships when I worked there. And they did do a course assessment just strictly using GIS for all of them. And they came up with the Tsable as a moderate to high. That's number 1 there. The second one is the Pacific Salmon Foundation. In 2024 did a habitat pressures assessment. And they published this one. I have the link for that one. And they came up with mostly high rating for spawning habitat in the Tsable. So both of these studies show that the Tsable has some issues. We'll leave it at that, some issues. And the primary development in the Tsable is logging. So we're at the actions part. We can hear the kids down the hall. They've had enough of the graphs for sure. We have 3 actions. The first one is to encourage other groups. Beaufort Watershed stewards and myself want to encourage other watershed groups to use this protocol. And it's publicly available online. My report actually acts as a template. I wrote it in that way that you can kind of follow it, and the appendices are where all the details are. And I really encourage other watersheds to do it. It's on our link on our website, and the links to the document are within my document. It's basically a low-cost protocol. If you have GIS and LiDAR-based information. What's LiDAR? Somebody share with me. Give me that name of that acronym.
Light detection and ranging.
Light detection and ranging. So it's laser read. They basically use it to get tree heights. Anyway, okay, we're losing the right side of the room. We'll stop there. I'm beating up on the right side of the room. Sorry. We spend about $6,000 for the GIS work, and as a contractor now, that's a little bit higher than what our actual cost was. But they give us a bit of a break on the work. So that's what it costs per hectare if you want to do the math. I spent about 133 hours doing the work, compiling the report, doing some field work. And you don't need to be a registered professional forester to do this work. You just need to have some field experience. And it is the practice of forestry, and it's governed by a law. So if you do the work, you have to be a registered professional forester if you take money for it. But I did the work. I didn't take any money. I took the liquid currency, which we all know what that is, and that's just fine. So there's no money crossed hands. I'm no longer a registered professional forester. I resigned when I retired, and then it sort of loosens my vocal cords a little bit. And we'll help you to get started. The second one is we're going to perform a cumulative effects assessment on our next watershed, which is the next one north of the Tsable. And using Dr. Alila's recommendations, we should be targeting larger watersheds, greater than 2,000 hectares, and watersheds that their NTUs, we know what that is now, turbidity units are above 5 from our assessment. So that's our screening tool. And the last one is really what's going on here today, what Jennifer's going to be talking about and what Daniel's going to be talking about after me. We're recommending that there really needs to be a reform to the Private Managed Forest Land Act. And I'll just leave it there because we'll kind of visit that a little bit more. And also the Water Sustainability Act. Anybody in the room know the Water Sustainability Act? I was talking to a guy in the back of the room and he was writing down all the acts that influence forestry. You got to add that one, man. Because the regulation in there is fantastic. It really talks about watershed sustainability plans, and it overarches private land as well as public land, but it's never been enacted. The government has never empowered those regulations, and they're just sitting there. So it's time. So I get asked a couple of times from my wife Rose as well as from Jennifer, so Dave, what would it look like if we amended that act? What would we see differently than what we see today? And that was prompted by the little drive to Bamfield. Who's driven the road to Bamfield? What a great road now, man. They put some, it makes you go faster, doesn't it, to get to the beach, but, so you won't see all of the cuts along the way, but, so what does it look like? So here's an image, and as you can see, you got the big truck on the left and the little truck on the right, so the right-hand side of the image, I'm gonna show you what it should look like and what it looks like now. And what we're proposing today, and I'm not gonna take all the thunder away from Jennifer, what she's proposing, but what I'm hoping is that if we reform the Private Managed Forest Land Act, it will embrace nature-directed stewardship. Remember that buzzword, that's what we're talking about, where nature takes the center stage. And all of those components on the table here are actually at the table too. So if we draw a line down the middle of that image, the left-hand side, the rate of harvest is off the scale. The right-hand side, and I'll explain why the right-hand side a little bit later, why that is. This is just north of the Tsable River. It's all on private land, and most of it embraces the next watershed I'm going to assess. So I got three things here that will look different. It'll look different because of the size, or I should say the rate of harvest on the land base will look more like the right. I'm advocating 30%, less than 30% cover loss. That's a real threshold for biodiversity, for hydrological health, and many aspects of the health of the watershed, 30%. That's a good one. And obviously the clear-cut size will come down. Look at the size of that clear-cut on the left-hand side. That's 290 hectares clear-cut. Now that's an aggregate clear-cut. There's a couple of younger trees in the one section. And on the right-hand side, there's an 8-hectare clear-cut. We'll have to wait till the question period, okay? Unless you have to go to the bathroom. Is that what? No? No? Okay. Just leave. That's fine. And the last one is under nature-directed stewardship, it's really important that any harvesting that goes on, obviously less than 5 hectares, or 3 hectares, 5 hectares, that we mimic natural processes. And what are the natural processes? On this east side of the island, it's not huge fires. We haven't had that for a long time, probably 300 years. It's going to be either windfall, like that smaller diagram on the right with those little patches. It's going to be very small patches and just clumps of trees that have died from insects or disease, and that the logging should mimic that. And that the logging decisions should be made about what trees you leave, not what you take. That's a nature, and she will expand on that. So I'm just, you noticed on this slide that the pink elephant showed up on the left-hand side. Did I speak about that?
No.
A little bit. That's the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about, when I talk to industry, when I talk to government, they don't want to talk about the rate of harvest on the Private Managed Forest Land Act. That is the elephant in the room, and we have to change that. Langley Lake Langley Lake Watershed is actually that around where that 8-hectare clear cut. That's why it's not logged as intensely as the left-hand side. And the reason is because the Private Managed Forest Land Act actually has some rigor around a licensed water intake. That's where they take their water for Union Bay, comes out of Langley Lake. So they have to log lighter. It has to be a lighter footprint. And so it can be done. This is but isn't every watershed in BC a community watershed?
Yeah.
Is it not?
Yeah.
I want to hear yes in the room.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Every watershed is a community watershed because it doesn't matter if it's people, if it's wildlife, if it's fish, it's a community of something. So we have to think that way. It has to change that way. And we have to have those tough conversations with the people involved and say, hey, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. Thank you.
Right on time. So 10 minutes for questions. Feel free to come to the mic. And while you're doing that, I'll get things started. Do your cumulative assessments also look at carbon storage in the trees and the soil?
No, they do not. The protocol doesn't have a carbon aspect to it, but it does have 8 other supplemental indicators other than the 6 I put up, which are more urban oriented. It's where other aspects of wastewater discharge, if there's more other developments within the watershed, they give ratings and things like that. So the carbon aspect, no, not quite there.
Thanks.
And it's not my protocol, it's the government's protocol. So
Yeah.
let's be clear.
Dave Haley.
Oh, Dave Haley.
Hello.
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for the presentation. You have had sort of a comparison with the Denman Hornby in terms of, the amount of road density or the equivalent clear-cut area on those islands.
Good question.
And the reason I'm bringing it up.
Good question.
Because you know I'm a forester.
Yep.
Landowner. Forestry is sometimes, I'll say, a little bit of an easy target. I do have a concern about the rate of development.
Yep.
And conversion of forested lands to non-forested lands.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you could provide some comparison.
Good point. I will, if you bear with me a minute, I'm going to change slides here. Because I was anticipating that question. Good on you, Dave. And I didn't. Let's see.
Maybe after.
Yeah. This slide, if we can see it, if we can kind of kill the lights a little bit, Jay, so you can see this slide. I don't have that necessarily those specific comparisons for Denman and Hornby compared to the Tsable, but I do have some of those numbers here for watersheds that I assessed that have far more private, far more public land involved and are regulated for the rate of harvest on them. And you'll notice road density is much lower where the, it's hard for me to highlight there, point at it. Can you see my cursor up there or not? No. Okay, you'll have to bear with me here. So if you look at Waterloo Creek, no, let's see. Yeah, well, okay, Mud Bay and Waterloo Creek have far more public land than private land, and their road density is quite a bit lower than the Tsable, which is 100%. Now, Wilford Creek has 100% private land, and its road density is still high, but it's over top of the threshold. So what I was finding, look at the equivalent clear-cut area, you asked that question, and the ones with more public land where the control of the rate of roading is more so on the public land than on the private land, its equivalent clear-cut area is lower. And also, if you look at the percent harvesting since 1990, the public land has a higher rate as well. So I don't have those quantitative numbers that you asked me, but the trends that I was seeing on public land were much lower than the private land. But good question. Thanks for asking that. I'll get rid of that slide. Megan.
Yeah, my question is about the Private Managed Forest Lands Act, and
Yep.
how many people in the room here remember when the NDP did their full consultation on Range of Forest Practices Act and the Private Managed Forest Lands Act?
Yeah, Daniel's going to talk about that, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, if you don't want to go
Because-
too far, I don't want to steal
Okay.
Daniel's thunder. But
So just the short answer then, did anything ever come from that Private Managed Forest Lands Act consultation?
quick answer, 0.
Yeah.
But Daniel will explain. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. That was a really great study. This is fascinating. I look forward to reading your report, which I haven't done. But what I thought about, I'm sort of on the fence about indicators myself. But anyway, the indicator for road density is capturing a bunch of stuff, I guess.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering, the example that you show where if you make these clear cuts smaller, that was the last slide that you showed, and I'm just thinking how that translates into road density, because you would presumably still have as much road zipping around to all these millions of little clear cuts as you would to the larger ones. So I'm just wondering how you address that.
Great question. That's a really technical question. That's a great question. When you do more patch cutting, more partial cutting, sometimes you need more access. And so it's the structure of the road and I think the aging of the road, the deactivation of the road Those would have to be nature-directed stewardship decisions in the watershed and that. And that is it's a great question, because when you start thinking about, a lot of folks say single tree selection or selection harvesting, that means multiple entries, and that means lots of road and disturbance activity. One of the methodologies that I was advocating when Guy talked about, my speech was about alternatives to clear cut, and there's a way of making an entry into log a block and not have to come back several times and use the road, called single entry dispersed harvesting. And so there are techniques, but that's a really good point. And I have trouble finding within the Private Managed Forest Land Act about the limits on the amount of roads. I see it more in the Public Act, but that's another debate. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, as you probably experienced, the forest industry is primarily focused on profit and keeping an industry financially viable.
Yep.
I was wondering your approach to kind of conserving and protecting and growing these really important ecosystems. Is it solely focused on just like regulating these industries and kind of continuing that back and forth where the industry is always going to push for more logging and the activists are always going to have to try and push more legislation to restrict what they can do? Or how do you kind of discover alternative economic or social governance models which could also provide better stewardship of the land, other than just regulating corporations that ultimately want to use this land for profit?
Yeah. A great question, and that's a very detailed question, and it's exactly what Jennifer's going to present. I've been lucky enough to help Jennifer in crafting that new act, and it embraces all of those elements of local community, sustainability, actually getting rid of the tenure system in BC and holding it, passing it over to the communities. But I'm not going to steal that thunder. Ask that question of Jennifer, and she'll help you out on that. Thanks.
Are we going to consider the streams and where logging occurs in the forest act?
In the new one? Yes, well, definitely. That would be a question to Jennifer, but what I've read, we haven't gone into that detail, into that document per se yet, but with nature-directed stewardship, of course, that is a higher priority. Just to give you context between riparian production, what's riparian? Can some people explain that? Can you, what's that? Yes, but what is the riparian area then?
It's like the edge of the water. It's like the buffer between, after the water, it's the buffer between the next.
Yeah, so riparian is that transition from aquatic habitat to terrestrial. So it's that most important transition of vegetation and where the trees and where the vegetation is and the stability along the streams. The difference between the two acts, there's actually an ex-student of mine in the room. Where did he go? Dan. No, he's left. Oh my goodness. He's had enough. I did teach one semester at VIU in their Forest Tech program, and I taught forest policy, a real sleeper. That was just drew the long straw on that. But what we did was we split the class in half, and we took this stream, and we said, one class, you identified the size of the stream, put the riparian protection in the Public Act. And on the other side, let's use the Private Managed Forest Land Act. And they were able to see the difference standing there. And they all agreed that we should really follow at least the public. At least it had a reserve zone where the private one doesn't.
In the crown land logging, you have to leave.
That's correct. Yeah, depending on the classification. I don't want to get into too much detail, but.
And also in the United States, especially in Oregon.
Yeah.
They've got up to 33 meters
Yeah.
allowed that you have to leave in private forest land.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think the new act will have quite a huge protection for that. Obviously, the footprint, that the hallmark of the new act will be a lighter footprint on the land.
And just to clarify what
Yeah.
we're trying to fight the area around the Englishman River.
Right.
And 23% of this island is in the Dunsmuir Agreement. So they, Dunsmuir sold all that land to the logging companies, and so we have a big chunk of land that is tied up in the private forest management act.
Okay, we're going to cut it off there, yeah. But just to let you know, the 5 watersheds I looked at, riparian disturbance was not a big issue. It wasn't a big issue. If anything, the folks that are managing that on their private land are exceeding the act, but the act allows you to do a little bit more damage. So that was just a take home there. Go ahead. I guess one more?
Yeah, one more quick.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for the talk and for volunteering. I think it's wonderful that things that volunteers do. And yeah, it's important to have the young people learn and stuff. I just think it's also hard because it's harder for people with like their own shelter and fuel costs and food costs. Like it seems like the money is you drive to your office job, and in the winter you're not even seeing the forest because you're in your office.
Right.
And then even in the like high competitive environmental jobs, like sometimes you don't get paid as much, or it's seasonal, or you have to write these reports about why you need money to save the environment. When I think most people, like everybody almost agrees the environment's important, it just isn't. It seems like in order for people actually to value it more, there needs to be more jobs where people get paid where they can live themselves. I don't know what my question is.
Well, no, fair enough. It's more of a statement, but for sure. And again, I'm gonna default to Jennifer's presentation. There's a huge section of the proposed act that talks about local economic security and resilience, and the way that we can get more out of the forest. And I would advocate that you read what she is going to present today on the website, and it talks about that. And it has some stats, a lot of statistics about jobs and how many jobs are lost in the forest industry in the last 20 years. Anybody guess in the room? 50,000. So that's just a primer for Jennifer's talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.